This is the gateway to the temples, the most important gateways in the temples. If you read about all the ancient temples, the eastern gate seems to have a certain always influence, a certain importance of the eastern gate, because that was the most important gate. Now, so this east-west link, or in reality it was a bit not east exactly, but you go down about 5 degrees or 7 degrees below it. It could fluctuate a bit from one place to the other, but it's always in that range between east and southeast. This is where you adjust. So if you have, let's say, a garden, you could get a pergola and just keep turning it in between east and southeast until you get this energy quality. Now, what if it's pointing away from your house then? We said that energy flows, once you have it in the right direction, it flows along linear objects. So what if I do this? I make a path and then turn it, and maybe my house is in this direction. The energy will go like that and go in the house. So you can actually, because we will not call it now spiritual energy, we'll take something very neutral. Let's call it the all-balancing energy or something, or the biogeometrical quality or something like that. This is this thing that balances everything. Now, no, not, you see, we will go sunrise, sunset, and all that, and the colors and that. We'll go into that tomorrow morning. The colors, the angles to the earth and the sun and all that. No, this is, if something is the center of, remember I said the center of the circle, that means it's a vortex beyond time and space. So it cannot be linked to the angles of the sun and all that. Let's say if you take the components, and every component taken separately can be reproduced by the angles of the sun. But then you put them together and you don't get this. This is, the components are beyond time and space. It's something that comes out here and is not affected by anything within our time and space. The only thing here, the whole design language must be based on one important criteria that you can see here, and that is create a center. You see, you have to interact with a center, because the center is beyond time and space. And centers exist everywhere. We create them. So we need this balancing energy. Now, sometimes this goes into all architecture. Now this is, you know, the gateways, the Arc de Triomphe, like in Paris, all those gateways that you have in history. Okay, this is not just a gateway like that. When, like in Paris, the Arc of Triomphe symbolizes victory. When an army went somewhere, they would create this gateway in a proper direction, have the spiritual element through it. So that means that this sort of, when they conquer the place, when they're going in the place, it's a divine mission. It is balanced with, they are protected, their prosperity and everything in the new place they're going by this energy. And this symbolizes their victory is actually given. So they couldn't believe that anything was possible without this connection. You see, without a balancing energy, nothing is possible in your life.
I have a question. Doesn't this have to do with the rotation of the earth? Anything like that? Does it cause the temperature?
It has. This one, it has to do with the angles. And you will learn that with color placement, we are going to work with angles. But it's not necessarily the rotation of the earth. It's like underground Rivers, they cross at certain angles. Certain angles produce those vortices that are very positive. Other angles produce the other negative vortices that bring cancer.
And isn't energy neutral, I mean, in essence?
What do you mean neutral?
The quality of the energy,
It's
it changes according to...
no, it's all balancing. It just balances anything. If something is overactive, it brings it down. If something is underactive, it will at the same let's say I'm radiating red energy at you because I'm doing color therapy and I find this very good. I'm radiating red energy because you have, let's say, a low function of thyroid or whatever, and I want to raise it. But maybe your stomach is overactive. So you see, so while I'm doing one thing, I could be disrupting another one. That's the mind working. So you say, okay, I do this, then I do that, then I do that. So every healer has his system of doing this and then rebalancing. So you have to go through a system to achieve healing, and the good healer will get better results than another one. But then if you go and stand on such a spot, you don't need anything because it will go in. What's overactive will become normal, what's underactive will become normal. Everything will be balanced for you. And it will be balanced from beyond time and space, from the total energy. That means the 90% I don't see, because you can only see your organs. But what if there are imbalances on levels that you don't see? What if a chakra, and you know chakra exists on the body and above the body, and they're not all in the body? What if the imbalance is outside the body? You can't see. So when you access that energy, it balances from the physical to everything. So why should we? Now we found the thing that balances everything. Why should we live without it? Now, when they built a town in ancient times, they used to do this. They used to look for a spot. Now we find the spot here. Okay. This spot would be the place where they built their sacred building. So they built a sacred building, their temple. Now, temple in that time, we call it a place of worship now. But like I said, they did not think of religion, it was practical. So temple was house of knowledge. It was house of health, but holistic health, holistic knowledge. So when there were some worldly things that you could learn outside the temple, there were some worldly ways of treatment outside the temple. But I'm saying here on the higher level of wisdom teaching that you access, you see, was found there. So they imagine all civilizations had the teaching that you learned and the teaching that you access. Now we forget about that. But you would go, and this is the word Pharaoh in Egypt comes from the word Per, Ankh. Per means house, Ankh, life, the house of life. This is Pharaoh. And this house of life was actually the place, the house of knowledge. And it was attached to the temple. It was part of the temple complex. So this type of knowledge was a knowledge based on connection. It's exactly what the mystics are doing today, this connection with the lower, with the upper. But that was a way of life. It wasn't just one mystic doing it, it was a way of life. And once you were connected, Perang, house of life, also means life from its source, the way it's given, and it means also that this connection is so important that the name Perang is one of the names given to the ruler, and that's Pharaoh comes from that, Perang. And we say today, we simplify it and say the Pharaoh. That means the Pharaoh was the person who was most connected with through the doorway with wisdom, with divine knowledge, and through this connection he brought prosperity to the country. You see? So it was a practical thing. A temple was a practical thing. Now, we would look somewhere here and find another spot. Connect them with the main avenue. So you see here, my city planning is coming out of the earth. I'm not inventing a city plan, and that's very important. Today, we draw plans of areas, irrelevant of what's happening there. No, it does. They grew their plans out of the earth. Now, here, what would I put here? Maybe the Pharaoh's palace, to make sure he was balanced all the time and got a lot of power and a lot of wisdom. Then maybe I look somewhere else here and find another place. Then I could put, let's say, the courthouse. That's where I need wisdom most. And maybe in another spot here somewhere, I would have the marketplace to bring prosperity to everything we did. And once I have my 2 or 3 spots, then first of all, we start doing the connections, connecting those spots like this, one way or the other. And I have a basic layout of the city. Then comes the next step. Those roads are the distribution lines of this energy. Now I want to bring them into every house, into every room, because everyone wants to live in it. Like the cavemen, they went around them in here. So we start the secondary roads. Now, you see something now? I did an orthogonal thing, the secondary roads. Why? Because when choosing the secondary road, they looked at energy lines in the earth, because I want connectivity. And they use them also, they plan their roads on those energy lines. So now they can actually distribute it everywhere. And because the energy grids in the earth, and that we'll learn tomorrow in radiesthesia, the energy grids of the earth, they are sort of orthogonal lines. They can, we have something like this. This is about 2 meters times 250. In feet, what would that be? 6 times 7 feet or something like that. And then you have another grid that you can find. This is called Hartmann grid, because it was discovered by Hartmann in Germany in I think around 1935 or something like that. Those Germans were very clever, huh, Helmut?
Sure.
And then there's another diagonal grid, which is called the Wittmann. He discovered it, but it's known under the name of Curry also grid. There are 2 Germans. And this is the first one is Hartmann. And these are communication grids on the earth. So why don't I use them in my planning? Because today we architects, we come, we take a piece of paper and then start making squares on it, and this is my modular shape, and then start designing a house. From where did this model come? Nowhere. In ancient times, they used to get people to find those lines. They would trace the grid. And they were called, these people were called augurs in Rome. Augurs were people who had a staff. I'll show you pictures of augurs tomorrow when we go into radiesthesia and see the instruments. You see the pictures of the instruments of radiesthesia once we start in radiesthesia. But they were standing with staffs like that, and the staffs were crooked at the end like this, or spiral, and all or most of the saints that you find in Christian Europe were actually augurs. What's an augur? they weren't just, the word saint wasn't just a holy man. No, it was a man of knowledge. That means he had his stick and he could find the spots. He could find the energy lines. He would set the proportions. For the sacred building mainly, they were building sacred buildings. So these people were carriers of the secrets of sacred buildings, and they would hold their stick like this. Now, if I knew the wavelength of water, I would, if it was that long, I would hold my stick here and have this exactly the wavelength of water, and then walk on the ground. And while I'm walking, the moment this tip, when I hit, does this, I'm on water because I have the wavelength of water. I have the wavelength of gold, wavelength of this, wavelength of... So the stick was, this stuff was a very important thing. Now the cardinals and popes hold them and they don't know what to do with them, you see. Yeah, they think they're symbols. But in ancient times, nothing was there for a meaning, for a symbol. All these were instruments, were devices, were energy devices. And you would find all those people mainly related to building, decoration, things like that, of those things. You would get people, they first find the grid, and now we ask ourselves, where is the origin of orthogonal architecture, square and rectangular rooms? Here. Because they rose from the grids of the earth. Because many people now, some modern architects say, oh, why do they always make square rooms and think when these shapes don't exist in nature? Because the earth has square. If you could wear certain glasses to see the grid, you would see in this room cubicles, that thick walls, and we are actually walking from one room to the other. There exists an invisible sort of structure, multi-story. So there's a German called Banker, and he called it the Banker cube system. So they're actually cubes that you go from one to the other. So when they built architecture, they used those cubes to align the walls. They used them to align the horizontal ceilings and grounds. So you didn't need surveying instruments, because if you detected one plane, you could detect the horizontal there. So they use that for surveying. And for example, if the Great Pyramid in Egypt is built like this, and the base, I mean, it's something like that. Now, logically, when you build something of the size of the Great Pyramid, you would first sort of flatten the base in order to be able to see what's on the other side when you make surveys. You see, you can't make a survey if you have a hill in the middle and you don't see the other side. It's not logical to build the building before clearing this and making a perfectly flat surface, and then you start your building. They didn't do that in the pyramid. So we wonder, how come they created all this? They have, even with laser, you need something to go through that. Well, it's very easy. You measure, see where the grid goes in, the horizontal one, and you have a level. When it goes out, you have a level. So you can use it for surveying the base. So architecture arose from the ground, and this is how cities were made. Now, if you do this, you are sure that you have this energy in every activity of your life. Now, we have buildings to interact with it, cities to interact with it, and then they looked at, now, like I said, how can I as a human being interact with it? Like I said, when I pointed at it like that, I found that I somehow entered into resonance. When I make my hand like this, automatically I enter into resonance. When I do this, so all of a sudden we learned a set of actions and rules and sounds and chanting and voice things and all that. We started finding out what actions we can do in every aspect of our life that produced this type of energy. So this is the secret of sacred chanting in the temples. It is using two special notes. You know, you get it from the bottom there and from the dome inside your mouth in such a way that you create a certain link there, and then all of a sudden you produce the same energy in a power spot. So you can produce it. There are many ways to produce it, not only architectural, but that's the basis of everything in life. Now, there's a step beyond that. Now, Pythagoras is telling us that they used something else there. He said that they used a certain proportion. And this is called the golden rule. That this was the proportion that they used, and it's a proportion of beauty. It's a proportion of growth. It's a proportion, I mean, they used it in everything. They stuck to it. And until lately, and even till now, in the first year of architectural studies, they have to pass through classes where, when they study all the Greek forms and Greek columns and all that, they have to construct them using the golden rule, which is 1 to 1.68. It's a ratio like this. And lately, this proportion has been revived again by all artists and has been called sacred geometry. In reality, it isn't sacred geometry. In reality, it was called the canons of architecture. The word canons, if you see the old Roman books of Vitruvius and all that, they say the canons means the laws. And they speak about this proportion. Now, when they would say this is proportion of spirituality and beauty, so we start, and you find this proportion used in every type of sacred monument in architecture through history till today. Not exactly today, very near. Okay, we decided all of a sudden, I mean, no, creativity, art, you know, when we started abstract art and things like that, why learn from nature? Why do things like that? Why don't I just bring out what's inside me? So now I want to make a building. Why stick to rules? Why stick to something? Why don't I just let my design thing go free and create a building the way it comes out and all that? So proportions, rules, and all things that they only restrict, and we took all that away from architecture. Yeah, okay, we didn't know what it was, what we were taking away. Now, you want the 30-second course or 1-minute course in sacred geometry? Yeah, 1 minute, okay? 1 minute to understand what it really is. Okay. Now time me. I'm putting stones on the ground. I'm just throwing stones like that on the ground. And when I throw 16 stones, the energy quality around the stones is the same as a spiritual power spot. It's the quality of number. The stone creates all the properties in a spiritual power spot. So this is the secret of the quality behind the number 16. The quantity 16 is the other side of its coin, is the quality of spiritual power spots. So now, of course, if you wanted to amplify a spiritual power spot, you would make a building with 16 doors, 16 windows, 16 columns, and all that. Then you'd amplify it. But then it wasn't very practical. So we thought, okay, I can't say I take 16 inches because nature doesn't understand inches, centimeters. What does nature understand? Proportions. So if I can transform the 16 to a proportion, if I bring a line that is equal to any 10 units, whatever, and beside it another line equals 16, then the proportion, energy-wise, nature could feel, you see, it's a proportion between two things. And this, in architecture, they thought, okay, if we use the proportion 1 to 1.6 or 10 to 16, it would give me the same, I'm still holding the energy quality of the number 16. Okay? And then, so I'd finish the lesson in sacred geometry. You don't need more than that, because that's the essence of sacred geometry. Now you go into a sacred geometry diagram. It's very complex.
Suppose you took 16 stones anywhere, not where the vortex is. If you have this
Anywhere you produce a vortex. Now you got the 1 minute sacred geometry. You know, sometimes when you condense things into the 1 minute thing, it's easier to follow. Like when, you know, when we did the energy key, the 1 minute energy key, it explains you all what you can just put all what you have from Feng Shui in there and sort of start finding for yourself all the answers. And when you have, now when you know this, you can start finding so many answers, so many things for yourself, because you know now the power is not in the proportion itself. The power is in the quality of quantity. That means in ancient Egypt, in ancient times, like I told you, they just came out of the door and the door is still open. So when they started to develop a system of numbers, a system of whatever geometrical system of anything, even a system of astronomy, all systems they started to develop were in the beginning just a sort of a manifestation of what was on the other side. They didn't develop them for their own sake. They didn't develop number just for commercial reasons when they went to the market. I mean, because of course when you go to the ancient Egyptian civilization, you're going to find, okay, they had coins, they had money, they had everything, they had a very sophisticated administrative and economical system and all that, but that arose later on. It shouldn't somehow distract us from the fact that in the temples they knew that the real thing was not the quantitative. For example, when they put the scribe, the royal scribe, sitting and he is writing on papyrus, and then they speak about the king and they give him a title, and one of the titles is the scribe. Now, would you give a king today the title of let's say of an accountant or something? Would it give him pleasure? I mean, he already has the title of a king. Okay, but the title scribe might mean something totally different than somebody writing your letters for you, you see. So scribe was he who used to sort of use the letters or the writing in conjunction with manipulation of the forces of nature. So it's somebody who had so much power. So of course, if you could use letters to interact with the forces of nature, then it is such an honor to be called scribe. See, and that's how it was. So numbers are the same thing. Every number has a personality. Now if I put 2 stones on the table, 3 stones on the table, I have an energy of number, energy field around it, energy quality. Now this energy quality, on the physical level, it shows quantity. On physical, you can just count them and it shows quantity. But what you don't see is the vitality level. Is there. It affects the vitality of the area. What you don't see around that is an emotional level, a mental level, a spiritual. But if around the number you could measure all the levels, that means that number is alive. Because having emotions and mental and all that, it means it's alive. Now if it has all those levels, that means it's a personality. It's a living personality. So you're accessing the soul of the number. You're accessing the personality of the number. And every number has this total personality of the number. When you just access the numerical aspect, you're accessing just the physical. So here, one of the ways of producing the sacred energy quality was for somebody who knew the numbers was using the number 16. So there are two numbers that produce that energy quality. One used in architecture, and that's 16, and one used in many esoteric works, and that's the 19. So you'll find that they use 19 and 16. 19, yes. But we haven't, we've discovered the use of 19 in many old scriptures, but nobody looked for it in architecture, but probably it's there too.
Does it have the same effect as 16?
It's a bit more powerful, slightly more powerful.
Well, even if you find like numerology, where 9 and 1 becomes 10, which is 1.
In a way, yes, and in a way, no, because 16, you could say 1 and 6 become 7. But 7, but it's on higher octave, imagine it to be on higher octave, but 7 has only one property, and that's communication. It doesn't have the balance. It does have all the other components of the spiritual spots. The 16 has them, has all the components. So if you make 16, 1 and 6, and you make a 7, it like I said, will have one component but not all the rest. So you can't do the same thing like numerology. You have to do measurements here. Now,
This is basically mostly related to measurement.
this is what?
Mostly related to measurements, the number 16, not necessarily what they do in numerology, where they take names.
No, you measure the energy quality around it, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Now, let's go a bit further about this energy quality that we are going to use, this biogeometrical energy quality. And let's slowly go into methods. What is a design language of shape that accesses it? It must be something, a design language related to accessing the center. Something always in accessing an invisible center somehow. So I'll give you some ideas. Why start developing something without looking for it in nature? Because nature must use that language. Now, if I look at the earth here and I see on the horizon of the earth, or not necessarily the horizon, take any two different materials. At the boundary between two materials, you could imagine if they're vibrating, then there is a certain friction between boundaries. So wherever you have a boundary, you have out of that boundary a communication wave coming out. And this communication wave is very similar to the energy quality of the number 7. So all boundaries of things have the quality of the 7, all boundaries. Now, here, this energy of communication, let's say on the beach, you have water and sand. In old England, the witches, in order to get a lot of energy in their body, you needed this communication energy to go through the fat layers of the body and give you a lot of energy. So they would go on that spot in a full moon, and on that spot exactly between the water and where the friction is, and they would dance naked on the beach here. Why dance naked on the beach? Because they want to expose as much body fat, the fat layers, they want to expose it to the energy, so it stores it inside, and the whole body is radiating of that energy stored in the fat. So they dance naked, and then afterwards, when the energy is stored, they cover the whole thing into a cloak or something to keep it in. See? And so there's always boundaries between things are places that are very, very important. when two boundaries cross like that, if you have a crossing of two things like that, then you get a vortex automatically. So it's even a more potent thing. Now, but this still doesn't give me any boundary like the horizon. I look at the horizon, I feel well, I like to look at the horizon, but it doesn't have the three or the usually we look at this energy with three components. It doesn't have all three components at the horizon. Why? Because when I look at the horizon, I am not really aware, my awareness does not go to the center. The center of the earth is too far away, and I'm here, you see. So there's no awareness of the center. Now, let's go a bit further. Mountains. When you have a mountain, see what this shape, a mountain, I'll call this shape the interface concept. Interface. When one goes into the other, the earth goes into the sky or a bay or something. What happens here when I do this, I've drawn the center here. So you see, the center becomes near, not in the center of the earth, but the shape itself has a new center in there. And so in an interface, you will find here a very strong spiritual power spot in the center here. And that's about all the stories of sacred mountains, of Moses going up the mountain, of Muhammad going up the mountain, of all the prophets going up the mountains. In all religions, something has to do with mountains, sacred mountains. And sacred mountains is because they go somewhere that has a very strong power spot. Or we can take it the opposite way. What if the mountain has a cave inside it? So I have a double interface, even more powerful. That's why if you play with puzzles, you get a very strong spiritual energy in your body. Because puzzles, you know, somehow you can sit for hours and enjoy puzzles. So when you start putting them together like that, this interfacing, you start feeling spiritual energy and you feel very relaxed with puzzles. Now, you could have the opposite. You could have a valley. And you also have sacred valleys, because any shape like this brings the center near. So the idea is just any interface, any change that brings in a center. It could be, you could have a bay like that, or a peninsula. You would always, if you have a seashore and then a bay, you'd always tend to be drawn to the bay, or a seashore and peninsula tend to be drawn to it there. There is something there. And this is the interface principle, and here you have a double interface principle. And you can find in all ancient buildings, whether they end up the wall this way or end up the wall with things like that, like you find in many buildings in the Middle East. You see the top of the walls, they have those decorations on the top of the walls, because this is the interface. You see the positive is equal to the negative. And when you have an interface, then automatically you have the spiritual energy flowing inside the wall, a connection between the earthly and the divine. And so you see, this is interface. So you see, there are many ways of connecting to it. The whole idea is connecting to a center. Now, we have a very potent biogeometrical shape in biogeometry. And it is like this. Now, here we have an awareness of an invisible center here. But if you touch it, you lose it. You see, if you draw a cross like that, then in the center here, you'd expect a cross must have, it's one of the geometrical shapes again that radiate, that interact with the components, because the cross comes from ancient Egypt, where in 3000 BC it was, it looked like that, very much like the Templar cross. And its name was the Neds. The word Neds means savior, because it's savior. And as you know, that Jesus Christ came to Egypt as a child, and he grew up in Egypt. So the linking of the cross with Christianity came from all the Gnostics in Egypt, who started reviving again the sign of the cross.